One like a son of man coming on the clouds, the great winepress of the wrath of God. These are just a couple of the images that we want to consider this week on Fridays with Phil. I'm Dr. Phil Mayo, and I'd like to share with you just a few minutes of biblical insight to help you along the way. If you enjoy the content, please be sure to subscribe. We find ourselves this week at the end of chapter 14 in the book of Revelation, and we're going to consider verses 14 through 20. Verses comprise the sixth of the seven unnumbered visions that we've talked about previously. The seven unnumbered visions start at the beginning of chapter 12 and extend through the beginning of chapter 15. In chapter 15, we'll be introduced to the seven angels who have the seven bowls or the seven last plagues. And in Revelation 15, 2 through 4, we'll see the seventh unnumbered vision. That is a picture of the saints in heaven who are celebrating. So we'll find here in chapter 14, verses 14 through 20, scenes of judgment. There's a lot going on in these verses, but I've divided it up into essentially two sections, and I want to take a look at those and find the connections with those sections to other parts, not only of the New Testament, but also of the prophetic tradition in the Old Testament. So let's start with Revelation 14, verse 14. I looked, and there before me was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was one like a son of man, with a crown of gold on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. And I want to pause there for just a minute. One like a son of man in the clouds. Now this is an image that goes all the way back to Daniel 7, and for sure this is something that is intended. Well, we see the image and this title even of the Son of Man in a number of other places, including the Gospels as well as earlier in the book of Revelation. If you recall John's first vision of Jesus in chapter 1, he turns and he sees someone like a son of man. So clearly this character here in Revelation chapter 14 is intended to invoke the memory of that image, and probably has the intention of wanting to tell us that this is in fact Jesus. Jesus himself says in the Gospels, when he's on trial, they ask him if he is the Messiah, and he says, "Today you will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great glory." And so here you see that image again of the Son of Man, which again connects back to Daniel chapter 7. And I want to take a look at Daniel chapter 7 and read just a little bit there so you can see the connection and the similar language. So let's go over to Daniel chapter 7, and we'll start in verse 13. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. You hear that? Hear the similarity of the language. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Now this vision of the Son of Man comes on the heels, in Daniel chapter 7, of the four beasts who represent four kingdoms, and they have now all been defeated and stripped of their authority, and now the Son of Man has all authority. Well, we saw the beast of chapter 13, who was a conglomeration of all the beasts of Daniel chapter 7, and now we see the Son of Man on the clouds coming, and now we're looking at judgment coming on the kingdoms of the earth and on this beast. I want to read to you as well just another small portion in Daniel chapter 7. This is verse 18. But the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever. We see this same kind of imagery in the very next chapter, Revelation 15, 2 through 4, where the saints are rejoicing and celebrating the victory of God. So Let's go back over to Revelation chapter 14 and continue to read in verse 15. Then another angel came out of the temple. Now, this is the temple that's in heaven. This is the throne room. We've seen this imagery of the temple imagery all through the book of Revelation as early as the throne room scene of chapters 4 and 5. And he comes out of the temple, and he called in a loud voice to him who was sitting on the cloud. This is the one like the Son of Man. Take your sickle and reap, because the time to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. So he who was seated on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. Now there's some debate here because this vision has a lot to do with judgment. Whether this harvesting of the earth is a good thing or a bad thing. Uh, Actually, I think it's a good thing. I think what we're seeing here is the Son of Man, i.e. Jesus, who is harvesting his people. We just saw the 144,000 at the beginning of chapter 14 who have the name of God the Father and of the Lamb on their foreheads. These are the people, I believe, that are being harvested from the earth. Because one of the things about the end of time, the end judgment, is you have the separation of those who belong to God and those who belong to Satan. And we'll see this later in the book of Revelation. But even Jesus uses this imagery in the gospel. When he in Matthew chapter 13, when he tells the parable of the wheat and the tares, he talks about how at the end of time there'll be a harvest. And an angel will come and will harvest the crops, the wheat and the tares together. And then they will separate the wheat and tares. The tares will be burned with fire, and the wheat will be gathered into the barn. And this is just a metaphor for the judgment, for the end of time, when the wicked will go to eternal punishment and the righteous will go to eternal reward. So I think what we see here in Revelation 14 through 20 actually are two parts of a scene of judgment. The first part is the gathering in of the righteous by the Son of Man. And the second part, which we'll look at next, is the judgment of the wicked. So look at verse 17. Another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Still another angel who had charge of the fire came from the altar and called in a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, take your sharp sickle and gather the cluster of grapes from the earth's vine, because its grapes are ripe. The angel swung the sickle on the earth, gathered its grapes, and threw them into the great winepress of God's wrath. They were trampled in the winepress outside the city, and blood flowed out of the press, rising as high as the horse's bridle for a distance of 1,600 stadia. Now notice the imagery here is the trampling of grapes. It's a very Middle Eastern imagery of grapes being pressed out and the juice flowing. And now the juice in this metaphor eventually turns to blood. And the language here is very similar to Isaiah chapter 63. And so in Isaiah 63, it isn't exactly clear who's talking until you get later in the chapter and you realize that it is God himself. And he's talking about how he is trampling the nations and bringing judgment on them. And this is primarily, I think, for how they have treated his people. Same idea in the book of Revelation. But listen to Isaiah 63, verse 3. I have trodden the winepress alone. From the nations no one was with me. I trampled them in my anger and trod them down in my wrath. Their blood spattered my garments, and I stained all my clothing. It was for me the day of vengeance. The year for me to redeem had come. I looked, but there was no one to help. I was appalled that no one gave support. So my own arm achieved salvation for me, and my own wrath sustained me. I trampled the nations in my anger. In my wrath I made them drunk and poured their blood on the ground. So you hear this idea, this metaphor again, of a wine press and the trampling of the grapes that becomes an image of the trampling of the nations and their blood being splattered on the warrior's garment. Same imagery that we find in the book of Revelation. So these two scenes here, I believe in Revelation 14, 14 through 20, are ones of the harvest of the righteous and the judgment of the wicked. Chapter 15, we'll see the seventh unnumbered vision, and then we'll get the introduction of the seven bowls, and we'll talk about these things next week, Fridays with Phil. Won't you join me? Thank you, and God bless you.